we talked about it earlier. You said like Constantine was responsible for like the first Constantinian chapel going up where we now have St. Peter's
Yes.
Basilica. Did I remember that correctly?
That's right, yeah.
And then St. Peter's Basilica was formed after
Yeah,
the Ottomans came in, like in the Renaissance period or something?
yeah, it's begun in, I think it's 1506 by Pope Julius II.
So way later. But you did a video, I think you were telling me, on like the secrets.
Like in a statue, an ancient statue, everything that statue is meant to convey something about the
right.
person. What he's wearing, how he's standing, his face, his expression. All of that is, in some ways symbolic. And so a truly gifted orator, the voice and the text are just the beginning. You're kind of, really working the room with everything that you are.
Yeah.
It's fascinating stuff.
What were the, like within the empire, they had lawyers and stuff, right? Uh-huh. What were the earliest, like what were the British courts of law like and the lawyers?
Well, we have the 12 tables, the Origins of Roman Law, that go back to about the year 450 BC, at the very beginning of the Republic.
Whoa.
The Romans have their greatest legacy to the modern world might well be law, actually, because they really developed the idea of a systematic law, a civil law that covers a huge range of possibilities. That they're advocates, often like Cicero. They're people who are, of the upper class. They're trained rhetoricians, and they're trying to make a name for themselves. Being a lawyer is kind of almost an appendix of being a politician. It's something you do on your way to becoming famous. But some guys are just lawyers and orators, and that's what they do. Become famous for being good at defense, being good at offense, whatever it might be. Typically later in the career, when you're a young, up-and-coming lawyer, you want to be on the offense. You want to be prosecuting, making a name for yourself, being an attacker, a bulldog. But when you're older and more established, you don't make any enemies. Then you're more of a defense attorney, warding off attacks from your friends and clients.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah. You're associates.
Yeah.
Not so different from today either. But anyway, yes, there were people who were effectively professional lawyers, but you could not, by Roman law, pay a lawyer, technically. People got around that in all kinds of ways. They gave gifts to their lawyer that amounted to a fee. So it wasn't
like a stock tip for a senator.
Exactly,
these days.
Right. But it wasn't quite as lucrative as a lawyer over there in Manhattan might be now. Yeah.
Right. So, but would it be like we were talking earlier about different people who were condemned to death or something? Like were there courts where someone was like accused of a serious crime or something, and it was tried out, not in front of a jury necessarily, but it was tried out in front of some sort of judge, and lawyers were involved in that case? Like, am I picturing that correctly, or is that a little bit of a stretch?
So if you were wronged, let's say somebody stole your dog or something, you were responsible for bringing the other party who stole your dog to a court. There wasn't like you couldn't have him arrested. You had to go bring him in yourself or get a posse of your friends to do it. There's a lot of vigilante justice, frankly, in the Roman world, where like you and your buddies, take the law into your own hands. But in theory, yes, anybody, if they can bring the person who wronged them before a judge, can then appeal to have it heard. I don't remember, honestly, all the laws for when they impanel a jury and how big the jury has to be. It varies depending on the kind of case. But yeah, so it's not all that well developed on the level of process, like what they do and when. But the law itself, the statutes governing, how they decide, how they try these cases, become very intricate. Famously, there's the Code of Justinian at the end of antiquity, who systematizes 1,000 years of Roman law into this, colossal series of codices, which we still have, of course, and that's the basis of law in continental Europe today. Like the Napoleonic Code, which still is part of the core French law, it's just Roman law simplified.
Wow.
And so is German law, actually, and the law of Louisiana for some reason, because it's based on the French one. But nowhere
They're
else.
Old school down
Yeah,
there.
yeah, they are old school. But the rest of America is English civil law. But anyway, or common law. But anyway,
the government, like you said in the last episode, the government has a decent amount of basis in like Rome and Greece.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And in law is definitely a case of that. Though it's really a specialized study. I need to learn more about, to be honest. Stay tuned on Toldinstone for
All
more of that
right,
kind
there's
of
gonna be more
content.
videos on that.
Yeah, yeah.
What about though once religion, we talked about this a bunch earlier, but like once religion, like Christianity becomes a core part of the empire after the Edict of Milan and the Council of Nicaea, like do we see as the popes start to come in and the power of the church, do we
Mhm.
start to see religious justice as well, where they kind of have their own control over that?
Well, there are ecclesiastical courts, but they're really for trying clergy. They're not for trying people who are
Got
not
it.
members of the clergy. So, Roman law does kind of fall out for a while, but it's rediscovered in northern Italy in like the 12th century, and it spread. So, it kind of for half a millennium, Roman law has kind of fallen into abeyance outside of the Byzantine Empire in the east. But after it's rediscovered in the 12th century, it really spreads pretty widely again. And so, even long after the Roman Empire is gone, Roman law is being used by states from the Holy Roman Empire to, again, later parts of, France eventually and Germany. And, again, even today in many parts of the world is the basis of legal codes.
Well, when we talked about it earlier, you said like Constantine was responsible for like the first Constantinian chapel going up where we now have St. Peter's
Yes.
Basilica. Did I remember that correctly?
That's right. Yeah.
And then St. Peter's Basilica was formed after
Yeah.
the Ottomans came in, like in the Renaissance period or something?
Yeah. It's begun in, I think it's 1506 by
Okay.
Pope Julius II.
So way later. But you did a video, I think you were telling me, on like the secrets of St.
Yes,
Peter's
yes.
Basilica. So that's later, like that's after the empire. But does that, I assume some of that ties back, because I didn't see this video, some of that ties back to history from the actual,
It does.
Holy Roman Empire.
So Pope Julius II, he's the guy who has Michelangelo paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. He's one of the great Renaissance popes. He picks his name supposedly in homage to Julius Caesar. That's how much he's interested in antiquity. He has a triumph at one point. He really sees himself as a classical general. And his idea is to rebuild St. Peter's as a kind of grand style classical building. And in the end, it does. It kind of combines the Pantheon's dome with the vault of Roman Bath, the Baths of Caracalla.
Oh, wow.
And it's more centralized than that. But and it uses huge amounts of Roman stone for both practical and symbolic reasons. So I mentioned we were talking earlier that like the baptismal font is the lid of Hadrian's sarcophagus, which is kind of fun. They just kind of flip it over
Yeah.
and rest it up a little bit. The high altar is a big chunk of marble from the Temple of Minerva. And all over everywhere you look, almost every column that's not gigantic in that church came from a Roman temple, and that was deliberate. It was both it was very fine stone, it was well carved. They wanted to use it, and it's the victory of Christianity, over its pagan rivals. So it's that video is all about kind of how the stone is reused and what it all means. But it's a nice way of showing again the layered nature of Rome and of Roman history.
Yeah, why did you name your channel Toldinstone, by the way?
It's hard to remember now. I had a list of like 5 names, and that all had like some kind of rock or stone. And then so I was doing a lot of stuff about ancient monuments. Then like, okay, it has to have something like stone or block or whatever in there. And I think Toldinstone was the least stupid name I had on that list.
I like it. It sounds like very. It's like
Toldinstone. Yeah, it
It's
sounds
very elegant.
It sounds a lot cooler than it actually is, but I'm into that. So
Yeah.
no worries.
Yeah, that's what it is. So we've been teasing all day, though, some of the fall of Rome, because people are so fascinated by that
Yes.
when you compare any empire falling over time. But the fall, as I think we said in the last episode we recorded, was complicated because it was two-phased over 1,000 years.
Right.
You basically had. I'm oversimplifying here, like you're gonna yell at me for this, but like if I wanted to, as a just fan of this from the outside, armchair quarterback, simplify this, I could say you have 3 phases of the empire. You have the Republic, you have the Empire, pre the West Empire falling, and then you have the East Empire for like 1,000 years. So focusing on the first one, which we've kind of been coming up against all day, which was the fall in 476 AD. One of the things you mentioned earlier on was that inflation was a key part of the late part of the empire, which immediately people right now look at us and go, "Oh shit, what's going on?" So how did it seems like almost a little bit odd to me, like when we have a system that's just basic coins that an emperor controls, like what happened there, and how did that they had other things besides money to trade, so it almost seems like inflation wouldn't be like a core driver, but why did it become that?
The trouble is that the army is paid in coins. And if you don't have enough silver or
Um,
gold to pay that army, there's only one way to do it, and that's to stretch the metal farther, to debase the currency.
mm.
And once you debase the currency, put less silver or gold into the coins, merchants will look at that coin and say, this is only, 5% silver. I'll give you 5% what that coin is worth, face value. And so inflation goes. So it's one of these things that the emperors are backed into a corner. They have to pay their soldiers more and more at a time of crisis in the 3rd century, at a time when they're earning less and less from taxes because the empire is in absolute disarray. And so they have to give these guys lots of coins, but the coins they can give them, the only coins they can give them are bad coins. And this floods the economy in a lot of ways, along with the general decay of, the Roman provincial structure at this time. But inflation.
Wait, what do you mean decay of provincial structure?
So the empire in the 3rd century, in the middle part of the 3rd century, between the Severan emperors and Diocletian, almost collapses. We call this the crisis of the 3rd century. And there's a series of very short-lived emperors. There's invasions from every side. And the empire really falls apart at the seams. It's only saved by a series of very competent military emperors who culminate in Diocletian, who then establish a much more bureaucratic state on the ruins of the classical Roman Empire. And so we see this sort of a moment of transition between the empire of Augustus and the empire that Constantine will inherit pretty soon afterward. An empire that's more centralized, that's more autocratic, and has a lot more space in some ways for a real ideology like Christianity. But anyway, so inflation, how do I figure that out? Inflation does not bring down the empire. It weakens the empire at a time when it does not need to be weakened. But the Roman Empire falls in the 5th century for really the reasons that you usually hear quoted. It's a combination of barbarian invasion from the outside, of civil wars that weaken the empire chronically from the inside, and some long-term structural changes, which, for all kinds of complicated reasons, make elite families in the western part of the empire less inclined to throw their lot in with the emperors, and more disposed to make deals with barbarian kings. Fewer and fewer people have a stake in the system, basically, and there's less and less money in the pot at a time when there's more and more crises. And all of this eventually culminates in bringing down the Western Empire.
So in a way, calling the empire a country, it's not, but calling it a country just for the sake of this argument. It's like they start caring about anything else outside their country as opposed to their country itself.
You could say that. I mean, there's a lot of scapegoating for sure, but there's also just a lot of internal chaos at the level of high politics. There's just constant civil wars that weaken, and they destroy the classic Roman army, what's left of it anyway. So the emperors are forced to hire mercenaries from outside, who are
Carthage.
Like Carthage, because mercenaries are much cheaper than retraining a new army, and of course that's dangerous because you stop paying those guys. They're not going to be loyal to you. They have no reason to be. And so there's all kinds of reasons why it all comes crashing down. But when people ask me, what strikes me most about this period, I say it's as interesting that the Eastern Empire survived for so long than the West did.
Why is that?
There's a couple of reasons. The East was less exposed to German invasion, for one thing, invasion from the north and northwest. It had the Bosporus, cutting it in half, which kind of saved parts of it from invasion. It was richer, always much richer. It had more cities. It had an aristocracy that in a lot of ways was more manageable than the Western. It was kind of a smaller scale aristocracy based in the cities that could be managed better. And dumb luck played part of it too. So did Constantinople itself, actually, this massive fortified city on the Bosporus, which is almost impossible to take. Having a capital that couldn't fall to barbarians was part of why the East survived so long.
Watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.